There you go. There we go. I think he's on. Good morning. It is the day before New Year's Eve and we've got an incredibly beautiful sunny day. It is a little bit wintry. The wind is forecast to get stronger today and it is very, very cold. I'm here today to fish a commercial. I'm going to be doing some bomb fishing and I've only got one bait with me. A loaf of bread. That is it. That is all I'm going to be fishing with today. And it's just going to be a great opportunity to show you some of the rigs that I use when we're fishing in winter with baits like bread. You can't get much cheaper than that and more readily available. I'm going to be fishing this lake that's behind me. I'm going to pick a peg where I've got lots of different options. We've got some islands on this lake. It's not very deep, but I'm just going to talk you through how I'm going to fish this session, and I'm sure we're going to find some fish somewhere. Well, here's the peg. This, for those people that know the complex, this is peg 36. As you can see, I'm pretty much in the middle of the lake here. So behind me is willows, and I'm about halfway down this bank here. And as you can see, I've got an island there. That island, to put it into context for you, is probably about 14 meters away, 15 meters, something like that. I've got another island that's straight in front of me. Now that island, the back edge of this island, this side of it, is actually over halfway. However, in the matches, because nobody else can reach that area, if this was a match, I would be able to cast to the back middle of that island. All right, so I've got loads of open water here. And then if you look to my right, there isn't anybody to my right for about 4 or 5 pegs. So I do have another island there that I could cast to. Range-wise, that is about 25 meters, something like that, 20, 22, 25, something like that. So I've got loads and loads of options. I've got a nice long margin here, which always looks nice, and I've got one to the left as well going into the wind. I've got lots of options, and that's one of the things, you know, that's important in winter. You know, we've got to expect that we're going to be chasing fish around the swim if we are catching some. And so I've already made my mind up where I'm going to start. I'm going to start towards this left-hand island. And one of the things that I just want to flag up is that some people, when they're fishing like this, when they realise in winter how important it is to find fish, one thing that lots of people do, I know, certainly that fish venues like this, is that when they're setting up, they get the bomb rod ready, which I've already got my rod set up here, which I'll show you in detail, and the rig, because it's a slightly different rig for today. And they actually cast that bomb out whilst they're actually setting up. So they'll cast the bomb out somewhere, put the rod down on the rest, and what they'll do is, while they're setting the rest of the gear up or sorting the bait out, they watch the tip. And that can be a great way of letting you know if there are any fish out there. You know, and you can do that in 2 or 3 different spots, and it just gives you an idea, because if you suddenly start getting indications, it might be signalling to you where might be a nice place to start your session. However, I'm not a massive fan of that. I don't like to really disturb the water in winter if I can help it, but you've got to have a starting point, and already I've made my mind up where I'm going to start, and then I'm going to progress to other areas. But first of all, let me just quickly show you what I've got on the side tray, and then I'm going to show you my rig, because it's a rig that most of you won't have seen me fish with before, but more importantly, I want to explain to you why I'm using that one today. If you like a simple bait tray when you're fishing, then this is definitely the method for you. There are lots of different ways of fishing with bread, and I'm certainly no expert, but I've caught my fair share of fish over the last 2 winters, fishing pretty much the way that I'm going to fish today. For me, I always find that fresh bread is best. This is just from Tesco's supermarket. This is medium sliced white bread, as you can see, and I just find that medium, I just seem to get along better with it. I know there are anglers that prefer the thicker sliced bread, but for me, I just prefer medium. It just tends to be a nice all-round thickness to use, no matter what size punch you're actually using on the day. I always find fresh bread's best. I've never really frozen it and used it for fishing like this, because when you freeze it, it obviously makes the bread last longer, but when it thaws out, you find that the bread is much tougher, much harder. There isn't as much air in it, And if you're going to want to pop the bread up, which basically means fish it so it's popped up off the bottom, then for that to happen, you do need bread that's got air in it. You know, that's the nature of the beast. So by fishing with a fresh loaf, you've got the best of both worlds. You can either fish with the bread popped up off the bottom to target those fish that are up in the water, or you can just squeeze the air out of it and have it so that it's a bottom bait. So it just gives you more options. Now you can have a nice fancy breadboard on your side tray. There are companies that produce those nice little breadboards with covers on, and they're brilliant, they do the job. However, you don't always need to go to that expense. As you can see here, what I'm doing today is just basically what I would do in the matches here. So this is not only just for filming this session for you, this is how I do things really. So as you can see, you're not going to get much simpler than that, are you? I've got a baiting needle there. That's going to allow me to put the discs of bread actually onto the hair rig, which is what I'm going to be using today. So that's all you need there. And then the other thing you need is some sort of a punch. Now there are loads of different bait punches out there, different styles. This one's, as you'd expect, the Matrix one. It's got a nice plunger, as you can see, and I'll be showing you how I'll be using that to punch out discs of bread so that we can mount them on the hair rig. But it doesn't really matter what you use, you know, as long as it works for you. These come in different diameters from probably, I think it's 6mm, 8mm, 10mm. This particular one that I've just grabbed is 10mm. And what you've got to remember is that the bread is going to swell up, you know, by its very nature. When it goes into the water, it is going to swell up. So when you're wondering about what size punch to use, just think about what your target fish are. Naturally, as you'd expect, if you're after smaller F1s or skimmers even, or smaller carp, then you might find smaller hook baits work better. However, if you want to be more selective and pick out bigger fish, then you might want to use something like a 10mm, and you could put up to 2, 3, 4, 5 discs on there to make your bait much bigger. But don't forget, it is going to swell up, and that's something I'm going to show you in a minute when I'll just show you how I just kind of make sure that my hair rigs and the bread is actually working how I want it. And that is it. That's all I've got on the side tray. You can't get much simpler than that, can you? They have forecast the wind today to get stronger. It's a very, very cold wind, but the position I've got today is basically I'm not fishing. If I was fishing down there, which is where they have been catching more fish, you know, over the last couple of weeks, that wind's blowing straight into you, you know, and comfort's very important in winter, you know, particularly if you're pleasure fishing. You want to be comfortable, and, you know, the direction of the wind will have a big impact on that. Even better if you can have the wind off your bike. You know, if that's coming over your head, it can be much more comfortable. But here, I think I've got the best of both worlds. It's coming from my left, but yeah, I've still got quite a bit of ripple on the water. So think about your location, because even if you've done everything right, you know, even if your setup's right, your bait's right, everything else is right, if you're fishing where the fish just don't want to be because of the conditions, then you're not going to, you know, catch as many fish as what you potentially could. So I'll quickly show you the setup, because it is slightly different from some of my other bomb fishing videos, but I want to explain why that is, you know, because everybody does things slightly different. I've got a 9-foot rod. My maximum cast here is about 30 metres. All I need is a nice 9-foot rod. This particular one's the XRC, the feeder 9 foot, simple as that. A nice 3000 reel, 8-pound mainline, Horizon. It's quite a low diameter 8-pound line, so it's really nice and supple, comes off the reel really nicely. No fancy shock leaders, we don't need any of that. And the rig that I'm going to kick off with is the rig that I just want to show you. So I've got a 10-gram pellet bomb there, as you can see, and that's free running. That is to comply with these fishery rules, but most fisheries have that rule now, so it's free running. And as you can see there, what I've actually got there is 2 rubber stoppers. Now, instead of using the quick change adapters that we use in lots of our bomb fishing, by using these rubber stoppers, it just gives me a little bit more flexibility. One of the things with bread fishing is that quite often the fish are off the bottom. You know, we know that at all times of year, especially in winter, that could be where they are. They're just sitting, or they're at that depth where they want to be. And if you're fishing with a bottom bait, you know, you could be several feet away from, or meters from, where the fish are actually sat. This is one of the added dimensions and advantages to fishing with bread, because you can fish with the bread popped up off the bottom at whatever sort of depth you think the fish are at. By using a rig like this gives me that flexibility. So I've got 2 rubber stoppers on there. These are the Matrix ones. There are lots of different brands out there, but the reason why I just want to flag it up to you is because these are the medium ones. These are the new ones. They are medium. Now, the reason why I'm saying that's important is because medium is just the right size for fishing with this setup. You could fish with a large, but you don't need to fish with a large. So if you don't need to, I'd rather have something that's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, a little bit more discreet. And the reason why I don't use a small one is because if you look at the bottom of that bomb there, that is designed to accept one of the quick change adapters. If you was to use the small size of these rubber beads, they will actually get stuck in that hole there, and that you then run the danger then of fishing with a fixed rig. You know, you've got to be very, very careful with fishing, you know, fishery rules. The small ones will stick in there, and sometimes, depending on how much force they've had to go in there, it could just stay there all the time, and therefore you will be breaking fishery rules. So be very, very careful when you're doing things like this. So these are the medium ones. So whatever brand you use, just check to make sure they don't get stuck into that hole there. And the reason why I've got 2 on is because if you put 1 on, if I had to whip it out to 30 meters, it could have a tendency to slip. And we don't want that to happen. Depending on the diameter of the line that you're using, if you're using a line that's a thicker diameter, these rubbers will be tighter on the line. So it's a balancing act. But I find with this 8-pound line, which is low diameter anyway, with 2 rubbers on, that won't slip. But what it allows me to do, it allows me to move them, as you can see. So what that's going to allow me to do is to fish with the bread popped up at different depths. So I could start off with a hook length that long, for example, and if I don't catch anything there, I could just slide the 2 rubbers up a little bit further and then pop the bread up higher off the bottom. And that way you've got lots and lots of flexibility. And I love having nice, easy, flexible rigs like that. It means you're not having to have multiple rods set up to do different jobs. And it means within seconds, you know, you've got an alternative. You could fish the bait a foot off the bottom, or you could fish it 3 feet off the bottom. Are you with me? So it's just a really nice simple rig, and that's it. Now to start off, I've got 30 centimeter hook length, or a foot, 12 inch. All my bomb fishing hook lengths for this type of fishing are on 30 centimeter hook lengths, and that allows me to fish. I'm going to kick off with that bait popped up about a foot off the bottom, just to see what happens, see if we catch anything. And if I feel as though the fish may be higher in the water, I can simply slide those rubbers up the line like so, and then I can pop that bait up even higher off the bottom. Gives you lots and lots of flexibility. So that is it, that is the rig, that's all we need for today. Now my approach, before I show you my hook bait, basically what I'm going to do is, so let me just show you the peg. So we've got all this open water here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kick off here. I'm going to kick off just towards the back edge where the wind isn't hitting the back edge, or where it's coming off the wind, the back of the island. That's where I'm going to start. I'll position my feeder arm so that I can put the butt of the rod on the seat box cushion, and then I've still got a nice angle to fish out there. And when you're fishing like this, if you've got a nice feeder arm with loads of flexibility, you can always have a nice angle in your rod, because that's so important, because a lot of these bites will literally just pull the rod in. If you was fishing a match, I would have 3 keep nets in. I could lay my rod across the keep nets in any position I want. You know, it's just down to personal preference. So I'm going to start there and then leave all this middle area until a little bit later on, and if we don't catch there, I can start working my way to the right and further out. Now when you're fishing with bread, particularly if you want to fish with it popped up, it's fun to try and experiment with your own hair rigs. So what I've got here is basically I've got a punch here. So all I'm going to do is punch out 2, just like that. Punch them out. Okay, so I've got 2 discs of bread in there, and I haven't squashed them down. So what I'm going to do now is, if I just put my baiting needle into the speed stop, you don't have to use speed stops, you can use little, there are stoppers that you can get that aren't attached to the rig. I'm just going to thread that in there, push the speed stop through. I've only got 2 discs on there. You can experiment with the length of your hair rig if you want to put more discs on there, and as you can see, that's mounted on there now. That's 2 discs with a speed stop, and then there's my hook. Now if I want it popped up, then it's nice to test it, you know, because one of the things you've got to think about is that your choice of hook and your speed stop, all that will have some sort of an impact on whether you how many discs of bread it's going to take for the bread to be popped up. Some hook patterns are heavier than others, so you know, whilst I might say 2 discs are going to be right today for my bread to be popped up, if you're not using the same sort of bread, you might have a heavier hook. All these things may be different, so this is why it's fun to experiment. But the good thing about this is that you don't have to be on the bank to do this. The bit that I'm doing now, you could do this at home in your kitchen. You know, it might take you 20 minutes to find out what the perfect combination of thickness slices of bread is to the hook that you're using, to the length of the hair, and all that sort of thing. So all I'm going to do is pop that in there. There you go. As you can see, that is popping up perfectly. Now over time, whilst that's in there, the bread will be taking on more and more water, and as it takes on more water, it will eventually just go softer and softer. It'll swell up, and then sooner or later it will sink. Now you might find that your choice of hook, you might need 3 discs of bread on there, or if you're using a smaller diameter of disc, you might use 2 or 3 6 mils instead of 2 8 mils. It's a balancing act, but obviously by doing that now, I feel confident now that when I do cast out there, because I want to start off with my bread popped up, that's exactly what I have got that option. Now I've just put that in again. You see it's coming up much slower that time. That's because it's taking on more and more water. And if you wanted to, you could test to see how long it takes for that to sink, or for the bread to just dissolve off the hair altogether. You could set your stopwatch, and that way you know that when you're fishing, you might know that you might have a maximum time of 5, 10 minutes, whatever it might be, 15 minutes, before your breads come off the hair and you're not fishing any longer. But there you go, that's popped up nicely. But what we can do, I'll just quickly show you this. Have a look how it's swollen up as well now. It's swollen up. And that's something you need to bear in mind, because obviously if that's going to swell up really big, it might cover up the point of the hook, depending on the size of the hook that you're using and the actual diameter of the disc of the bread that you're using. Okay, so all I'm going to do is now, see how easy that came off there? So all I'm going to do now is, if I just quickly, I'll just do this once, and then we're going to get fishing. So I'm going to put 2 discs in there now. So that's exactly the same as what I've just done, but what I can do is push that plunger down into my hand or into the bait box, and what you're actually doing there is you're actually squeezing the air out of the bread. So if I repeat that process now, put that on the speed stop there, put that into what this will do is the first thing it'll do is it'll make the bread much tougher. So if you want to cast further or into a headwind, when your bread's coming off, by doing this is going to help keep your bread on, because you've compacted it, you've squeezed the air out. As you can see, it's not taking up as much of the hair as you'd expect, because it's much thinner now. Let's see how that performs. There we go, sunk straight to the bottom. So as you can see, by using bread like this and just having a look at this, the different options that you've got lots of variation in your rig at fishing at different depths. So you can pop your bread up at different depths, but you can also fish it as a bottom bait. Now if I was going to fish it as a bottom bait, there's quite a bit of the hair loose there, as you can see, so I could probably put 4 of those discs on, and that'll fill the hair up, and that could be a much more selective bait for bigger fish. But as you can see, that sinks straight to the bottom, so you're fishing on the bottom if that's what you want to do. But because you've compacted the bread as well, it's going to stay on the hair a little bit longer, it's a little bit more robust, and that could be a nice way if small fish are a problem. But there we go, we've got loads of versatility. So I'm going to get a couple of the discs on, popped up, and then get out towards that left-hand island. So let me just punch a couple out. I'm not going to squeeze the air out of these 2. So I'm going to put in just two discs. I'll put this on here. I've already got my feeder arm positioned where it's at a nice angle for where I'm going to put the bomb, so that if I do get any violent bites, the rod is going to absorb that, because that's what you want the rod to do. You've got to be careful if you're virtually pointing your rod at the fish, because the rod's not doing its job. So I'm leaving that set at 30 centimeters. For next thing, always make sure your drag's undone. All I'm going to do is pop that just there, just off the back of that island. Get my rod down, just get that positioned a little bit lower to the water. There we go. And then I'm going to set the stopwatch, just so I've got some sort of an idea about how long it's been out there, and you can almost give yourself a bit of a plan of what your session's going to be like. So I could say I'm going to have probably 2 10-minute casts just there, and if I don't get any liners, any indications, I can work it around. I could go around to the left in front of this left-hand side of the island here, or I could start working my way out into that open water and just gradually work my way around looking for fish. But what I am going to do today, because the wind's blowing to the right, I'm going to try and leave everything to my right until later on in the session. I'm going to try and leave that as a nice quiet area, so that as the day progresses, even going into the latter stages of today, I've still got loads of uncharted water. It's undisturbed water that I know I can explore. There you go, There we go, I think he's on. That's interesting. I've only had two casts to the back edge of that island there where I started, and I didn't get a single indication, so I just thought I'd work my way to the right. So I've literally just gone about halfway between me and the island straight in front. If you look at the stopwatch there, it's only been out there, it had only been out there 4 minutes. That's just on 2 discs of bread. I had a couple of little indications, to be fair, before that, but then obviously you saw, or you've seen, it's an F1. Well, that's brilliant, and that's literally within 4 minutes of being in that new spot. Nice chunky F1, very cold as you'd expect. Look at that, so it's just there in the corner of its mouth. It's a brilliant start. Only the 3rd cast, but it's the 2nd location. And one of the things that you'll find is that generally, if you are going to find 1 or 2 fish, you will quite often get a bite pretty quickly. So I've got to repeat that, haven't I? I was just on 2 discs, as you saw. Let's go back out there. That wind is getting a little bit stronger. It hasn't changed direction, it's still blowing down to this right hand side, but thankfully, well, that fish wasn't too big, was it? You know, fish of that sort of stamp you should really be controlling pretty well with this sort of a setup. But one of the things that it's good to take note of is when you do hook fish eventually, wherever it might be, just pay attention to where they've actually been in the swim when you hook them, because that could spook other fish out of the swim. So if you have got any sort of a quiet area anywhere, then it just makes sense to try and make sure that the fish aren't going to go through those areas, because you want to leave them nice and quiet for later on. It's just not quite halfway. I'm going to go back. That's the exact same spot where I've just caught that fish. Get that line down out of that wind, set that stopwatch, see if we can get another one from that spot. And so what you often find is that you're chasing fish around the swim, you know, if you can find some. Sometimes you might find fish early, sometimes it might take you 2 hours to find them. This is a very different approach from when you're fishing with bomb and corn, for example, because with bomb and corn, yes, you can still search your swim, and that's obviously still something that we will always do, especially through winter. But with corn, you generally find that you have got somewhere in your peg where you've fed some corn, you know, where you've fed some bait, where you're hoping you're going to catch a run of fish on, usually, or quite often, later on, right at the end of the session, in the latter stages. But with bread, you're not really doing that with this approach. There isn't one area of the swim today where I'm actually putting any bait in where I could expect to get a run of fish. So it's a very, very mobile approach. We see lots of anglers fishing with bread, dobbing with bread on the pole. It's the exact same principle. There we go. That's got to be on. Let's have a look. That feels a decent fish as well. So, you know, it's one of those sorts of fishing that, you know, if you are new to this sort of fishing, as you can see, I mean, it's New Year's Eve tomorrow, you know, so that tells you how late we are in the year. That one's counting to the left. You see how late we are in the year. The wind's freezing cold. You probably see the anglers around me, how they're all wrapped up. And yet by the 3rd cast, we'd found some fish. So whilst it can be a patient way of fishing, by being mobile like this, you're not just sitting there hoping to catch fish, you're actually going looking for them. And I think that's the appeal for lots of anglers. That's one of the bits I love about it. You know, you're actually actively looking for fish. So even if you don't catch in 2 or 3 spots, you've still got lots of other areas to try. And the other bonus as well is that at this time of year, another F1, at this time of year, the later that you get in the session, the better it can be quite often, you know. So even right up until the last hour, you know, that could be your best period. So even if you haven't caught after 3 hours, you're still kind of in the back of your mind thinking, yeah, but it's going to get better because the light will go a little bit, the temperature might go up a little bit, and as it gets later on in the day, the fish generally do want to feed at some stage. So, you know, whilst it's winter fishing, it can still be quite an active way of fishing, if that makes sense. Fantastic winter fishing, isn't it? Brilliant. And it's literally, the bait that we're using is literally only cost pence. Brilliant fishing. It's been a really enjoyable short session, and I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of an insight into how for a very little money you can get out there and still enjoy plenty of bites and plenty of fishing through winter on lovely commercial fisheries like this with a very cheap bait bill as well. If you've enjoyed this insight, please give this one a thumbs up and let me know if you'd like to see me getting out on more winter sessions, taking you right through the next few weeks, where hopefully I'm just going to be helping you out to hopefully catch a few more fish and, more importantly, enjoy your fishing.